Tonight, we invite you to settle in, to let the weight of the day fall away, and to allow your mind to travel back in time. There is nothing you need to do, nothing to focus on too intently. Simply breathe and listen. Our story tonight takes us to the heart of the Second World War, to occupied France, but we will not be visiting the grand halls of power or the chaotic front lines. Instead, we will find ourselves in the quiet, shadowed corners of daily life, where ordinary people were called upon to do extraordinary things. We will be following the story of one such person, a woman of remarkable courage and cunning, known to those who hunted her as the White Mouse. Her real name was Nancy Wake, and her life was one of sharp contrasts and immense risk. But before we delve into the thrilling missions and the narrow escapes that defined her legend, we must first understand the world she inhabited, a world of quiet observation, of careful routine, of a constant low hum of tension beneath the surface of normalcy. So, find a comfortable position. Let your body grow heavy, your muscles soften. Allow the sound of my voice to be a gentle guide, a steady rhythm in the quiet of your room. We are going to immerse ourselves in the fabric of her everyday existence. A life lived under a false name, in a country that was not her own, surrounded by both hidden friends and unseen enemies. This is not a story of grand battles, but of the quiet, patient, and deeply human struggle that unfolded day by day on the cobblestone streets and in the quiet apartments of a nation holding its breath. If you enjoy these journeys into the past, I'd really appreciate a quick like or even a subscribe. It helps our small community of quiet history lovers grow more than you know. I'm always curious where you all are listening from, so feel free to drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. It's fascinating to see our global community connecting through these stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine yourself in a small provincial town in central France, sometime in the year 1943. The grand sweeping history of the war feels distant here, replaced by the mundane, repetitive rhythm of an occupied nation. The air itself seems different, heavier. It carries the usual sense of a French town, the faint aroma of baking bread from a boulangerie that opens for only a few hours, the damp, earthy smell from the river, the sharp tang of coal smoke hanging in the cool morning air. But underneath it all is another scent, harder to define, the metallic, sterile scent of authority, of foreign military presence. Let's picture the woman we will come to know as Nancy Wake, though here she is someone else entirely. She is perhaps Madame André, or some other simple, forgettable name. Her identity is a carefully constructed garment, one she wears more consciously than her simple dress. She lives in a small second-floor apartment overlooking a quiet square. The building is old, its stone facade stained with time. The wooden staircase creaks with a familiar pattern of groans and sighs as she ascends it each day. These sounds are a comfort, a part of the routine she has built to shield herself. Her morning begins not with an alarm, but with the subtle shift of light through the thin curtains of her window. The first sounds are not of birdsong, but of the town stirring under curfew. The distant rumble of a German patrol truck making its rounds, its engine a low, guttural growl that has become as normal as the church bells. Then, the clatter of wooden-soled shoes on the cobblestones below. Leather is a luxury, requisitioned for the German army, and so the citizens of the town have adapted, their footsteps making a hollow, echoing sound that has become the new percussion of daily life. She rises from a simple bed, the mattress perhaps a little lumpy, the sheets clean but worn thin from countless washes with harsh, rationed soap. The room is sparse. There is a small wooden table, a single chair, a wardrobe, and a small basin for washing. Every object is chosen for its inconspicuous nature. There are no personal photographs, no sentimental keepsakes that could betray a life lived before this one. Her existence is intentionally shallow, a persona with no past. Dressing is a deliberate act. The clothes are plain, practical, a simple blouse perhaps made from reused fabric, and a dark, A-line skirt. Women's fashion, even in Paris, has adapted to the shortages. Styles are simpler, shoulders often padded to give a stronger silhouette, and waistlines cinched to conserve fabric. Stockings are nearly impossible to find, a treasure saved for only the most important occasions. On most days, she, like other women, might use a special dye to stain her legs, carefully drawing a line down the back of her calf with an eyebrow pencil to mimic a seam. A small, defiant act of elegance in a world of scarcity. Over this, she might wear a simple, functional coat, its color muted, designed to blend in, to be forgotten the moment she turns a corner. Her breakfast is meager. The German occupation has instituted a strict rationing system, and the daily calorie allowance is barely enough to sustain a person who does no physical labor. On the table is a piece of dark, dense bread, perhaps made with more rye or barley than wheat. There might be a small smear of margarine, a luxury, or perhaps a bit of jam made from last summer's less than perfect fruit. Real coffee is a memory. What she drinks is a bitter roasted brew of chicory or acorns, a concoction known as ersatz coffee. As she eats, she sits by the window, not looking out directly, but observing the reflections in the glass of the shop across the square. She watches the patterns of the town waking up. She notes which neighbors leave for the market, which German soldiers are on the early patrol, the delivery cart that brings firewood to the local commandantur. Her mind is a quiet ledger, recording the tiny, seemingly insignificant details of the day. This is not paranoia, it is professionalism, it is survival. The most important part of her morning ritual is checking her papers, her carte d'identité, her ration book. These documents are her shield. The photograph is of a serious-looking woman, her expression neutral, her hair styled simply. The name is not hers, the date of birth a fiction, the place of origin carefully chosen. The papers must be worn, but not too worn. The folds must be natural. A single misplaced crease, a smudge of ink that looks too new, could be a death sentence during a random check. She runs her thumb over the stiff paper, feeling its texture, reinforcing its reality in her own mind. She is this person. For all intents and purposes, the woman she once was does not exist in this town. When she leaves the apartment, she locks the door and descends the creaking stairs. The air in the stairwell is cool and smells of dust and old wood. Emerging onto the street is like stepping onto a stage. Every movement must be natural, her pace unhurried, her expression placid. She carries a string bag or a simple basket, the expected accessory of a woman on her way to the market. She avoids eye contact with the German soldiers she passes, but she is acutely aware of them. She feels their presence as a change in the atmosphere, a subtle stiffening in the posture of the French civilians around her. The market square is the heart of the town's public life, and it is a theatre of quiet struggle. The stores are less full than they once were. The German authorities have requisitioned a huge portion of France's agricultural output, leaving little for the citizens. What is available is rationed and expensive. A typical adult ration provides only about 1,100 to 1,300 calories a day, a diet of slow starvation. There are queues for everything. A long, patient line for bread, another for the meager weekly meat ration, perhaps only a few hundred grams. She joins a queue, her face settling into the same mask of weary patience as the other women around her. Here, in the queue, is where the subtlest form of communication happens. A shared, resigned glance, a quiet, muttered complaint about the quality of the vegetables. But it is also a place of immense danger. Informants are a constant, invisible threat. A careless word, a conversation with the wrong person could be reported. So she remains quiet, observant. She listens to the conversations around her, the gossip, the rumors. Who has a cousin on a farm who might be able to sell a few eggs on the black market? Which baker is known for being generous with his measurements? This information is currency. It is also intelligence. The black market, or marché noir, is an essential part of survival, a national pastime born of necessity, but engaging with it is a risk. Our agent might have a prearranged, subtle transaction. Perhaps she buys a small, withered-looking cabbage from a stallholder, but tucked inside the leaves is a small packet of real butter, wrapped in wax paper. The exchange of money is precise, no haggling, no suspicious conversation. It is a tiny, silent conspiracy, one of thousands happening across France every day. It is an act of defiance that looks like a simple purchase. Her route through the town is never entirely random. She might take a slightly longer path home, passing the local gendarmerie, the post office, the railway station. She walks without seeming to look, but her eyes miss nothing. She notes the number of guards, the times of their shift changes, the types of vehicles parked outside. She is a sponge, absorbing information that might seem trivial, but could one day be critical. The placement of a sentry, the schedule of a regular delivery, the arrival of a new high-ranking officer, all are pieces of a puzzle. Back in her apartment, the afternoon is long and quiet. This is perhaps the most challenging part of her day, the stillness, the waiting. An agent's life is not one of constant action. It is composed of long stretches of deliberate, disciplined boredom, She cannot simply relax. She must perform the act of living a quiet, unremarkable life. She might sit by the window and mend her clothes, a task that was a necessity for everyone. She might read a book, but the book itself is a prop. Her mind focused elsewhere, replaying the morning's observations, cementing them in her memory. She must be constantly prepared for a knock on the door. It could be a neighbor asking for a bit of sugar. It could be a random check by the milice, the French paramilitary police, who often worked with the Gestapo and were feared even more than the Germans for their local knowledge and cruelty. Her heart must not leap into her throat. Her movements must remain calm, her answers to questions simple and direct. Her legend, her cover story, must be second nature, a comfortable old coat she can slip into without a moment's thought. The constant vigilance is a profound mental burden. The fear is a low, persistent hum beneath the surface of her thoughts. Any sudden noise on the stairs, any unexpected shout from the street, could trigger a surge of adrenaline that she must instantly suppress. She might feel a fleeting kinship with a mouse, living silently within the walls, always listening, always ready to freeze or to flee. It is no wonder the Gestapo, the unseen enemies hunting for ghosts like her, would eventually give her the nickname La Souris Blanche, the white mouse. As evening approaches, the town begins to contract. The 9 p.m. curfew looms. The streets empty out, the clatter of wooden shoes fades, and a heavy silence descends, punctuated only by the footsteps of a patrol or the distant barking of a dog. The city goes dark, a blackout mandated to protect against Allied air raids, plunging everything into a deep, oppressive blackness. Her evening meal is as simple as her first, perhaps some soup made from watery vegetable stock and a few potatoes. She eats slowly, deliberately, and then, in the deep quiet of the night, when the town is asleep and the risk of discovery is at its lowest, her true work might begin. In the dimmest light, shielded by the blackout curtains, she might retrieve a small hidden object, a coded message on a tiny slip of paper, a map, or a list of names. Her task is not to understand it, but to be its temporary guardian, to pass it along the chain. The document itself is a source of immense danger. If found, it would mean not just her own death, but the death of many others. She holds it carefully, her senses on high alert, listening to the old building as it settles around her, every creak and groan a potential threat. The rhythm of her life is one of patience and vigilance, a quiet, constant struggle played out in the mundane details of a day, a life that is a carefully constructed lie, lived in the service of a truth she hopes will one day return to France. The woman in that quiet apartment, the woman we have called Madame André, was not born to this life of shadows and whispers. Her existence was not always a performance of placid obscurity. Her story began half a world away, under a much brighter sun, and was marked from its earliest days by a spirit that was anything but subdued. Nancy Grace Augusta Wake was born in Wellington, New Zealand, in the late summer of 1912, but her childhood took root across the Tasman Sea in Sydney, Australia, where her family moved when she was very young. She was the youngest of 6 children, and from an early age, she possessed a restless energy, a fierce independence that did not sit easily within the confines of her conventional home life. She was a reader, devouring books and stories, but her imagination was not content to simply live on the page. It pushed her outwards towards the horizon. At just 16 years old, in an act that foretold the decisiveness that would later define her, she ran away from home. She used a small inheritance from an aunt to buy a ticket, not back to New Zealand, but across the ocean to London. The London of the early 1930s was a world away from suburban Sydney. It was a place of immense possibility, and Nancy, young and determined, threw herself into it. She studied journalism, learning how to observe, how to listen, and how to craft a narrative, skills that would one day serve her in a very different, more dangerous context. She was charismatic and vivacious, with a sharp wit and a captivating presence. Her life was her own, and she lived it with a rare and unapologetic freedom. This freedom eventually took her to Paris, the vibrant, glittering heart of Europe between the wars. Imagine Paris in the mid-1930s. It was a city of art, of literature, of spirited debate in smoke-filled cafes. It was a city of high fashion, of grand parties, of a seemingly endless celebration of life. And Nancy Wake, with her striking looks and boundless confidence, moved through this world with ease. She worked as a freelance journalist, a European correspondent for the Hearst newspaper group, a job that funded a life of glamour and excitement. It was in this world, in the sun-drenched, sophisticated city of Marseille on the French Riviera, that she met Henri Fiocca. He was a wealthy French industrialist, a handsome and charming man who was instantly captivated by her spirit. They fell deeply in love, a whirlwind romance that culminated in their marriage in November of 1939. For a brief moment, her life was one of idyllic luxury. She had a loving husband, a beautiful home in Marseille, wealth and status. It was the life she had pursued across oceans, a life of comfort and happiness. But the world outside their beautiful villa was darkening. The celebratory air of the 1930s was giving way to the cold, hard reality of political tension and rising aggression. Nancy's work as a journalist had already given her a glimpse into this darkness, a view that would irrevocably shape her future. On assignment in Vienna in the mid-1930s, shortly after the Anschluss, she witnessed the Nazism she had only read about. She saw its ideology made real in the streets. She saw gangs of brown shirts roaming freely, their presence a constant low-level terror. She witnessed Jewish men and women being publicly humiliated, tied to posts and beaten, their dignity stripped from them in broad daylight, while crowds either watched in silence or cheered. These experiences were not abstract political reports to her. They were visceral, ugly, and real. They did not frighten her into silence or retreat. Instead, they forged within her a profound and deeply personal hatred for the Nazi regime and everything it represented. The casual cruelty, the public degradation of innocent people. It offended her innate sense of justice, her belief in personal freedom. A conviction began to harden within her, a resolve that she would never stand by and allow such brutality to go unchallenged. This conviction would soon be tested. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland and France and Britain declared war. Nancy's wedding to Henri took place just 2 months later, under the long shadow of this impending conflict. For a few months, life in France carried on in a strange state of suspended animation known as the phony war. But in May of 1940, the German blitzkrieg shattered the illusion of safety. The seemingly invincible French army collapsed. By June, Paris had fallen and France had surrendered. The country was divided. The northern half, including Paris, was under direct German military occupation. The southern half, where Nancy and Henri lived in Marseille, became known as the Free Zone, governed by a collaborative French regime headquartered in the town of Vichy. But free was a misnomer. The Vichy government was deeply complicit with the Germans, and their influence was everywhere. The idyllic life Nancy and Henri had known was over. Nancy Wake did not hesitate. Her hatred for the Nazis, born on the streets of Vienna, now had an outlet. She could not be a bystander. Her first foray into clandestine work was almost instinctual. She joined the war effort as an ambulance driver, transporting wounded soldiers and civilians. But her talents and her temperament were not suited for waiting on the sidelines. She was a person of action, a connector of people. And in the chaos of defeated France, there were many people who needed connecting. Marseille, as a major port city, became a hub for those trying to escape Nazi-occupied Europe. Escaped prisoners of war, downed Allied airmen, refugees and agents all sought a way out, usually over the treacherous Pyrenees Mountains into neutral Spain. Escape networks began to form, fragile, clandestine chains of safe houses and guides. Nancy, with her wealth, her connections, her flawless French and her iron nerve, was a natural fit for this work. She began as a courier, using her apparent status as a wealthy man's wife as a cover. She could travel more easily than most, her confidence and style disarming suspicious officials. She ferried messages, food and supplies to those in hiding. But her role quickly grew. She became a key figure in what was one of the most effective escape routes, the Pat O'Leary line, run by a British officer named Ian Garrow, and later by a Belgian army doctor, Albert Garisse. Nancy became an organizer, a planner. She used Henri's money to rent safe houses. She procured false documents. She arranged for guides. She personally escorted parcels, as the fugitives were called, from one safe point to the next. The risks were immense. Discovery meant immediate arrest, interrogation, torture, and almost certain execution, not just for her, but for everyone in the network. Every stranger was a potential informant, every police checkpoint a potential trap. Yet she thrived in the danger. She seemed to possess an uncanny ability to talk her way out of trouble, to use her charm as a weapon, and to simply disappear when necessary. Her work saved the lives of hundreds of Allied personnel and refugees. And as her successes mounted, so did the attention from the enemy. The Gestapo, the German secret state police, became aware of a particularly effective and elusive figure within the Marseille resistance. They didn't know her real name, her nationality, or what she looked like. They only knew her results. They knew that a certain operative was causing them immense frustration, spiriting away valuable prisoners from right under their noses. They intercepted communications. They tortured captured agents, but her identity remained a mystery. They gave this phantom a nickname, a testament to her slipperiness. Die Weiße Maus, the White Mouse. By 1943, the Gestapo was closing in. They had tapped her phone and intercepted a message that finally gave them a description. The net was tightening. The Germans put a price on the White Mouse's head. 5 million francs, an astronomical sum. Her photograph was circulated. It was no longer safe. Her network urged her to leave France immediately. The decision was agonizing. Leaving meant leaving Henri behind. They both believed that without her, he would be safe. He was a French citizen, a respected businessman, not directly implicated in her activities. Or so they thought. They said their goodbyes. A painful farewell filled with the hope of a swift reunion after the war. It was a hope that would prove tragically misplaced. Nancy's own escape was a trial in itself. It took 6 attempts. She was arrested once in Toulouse, but was released 4 days later through the intervention of the O'Leary line. Her final attempt was a grueling trek on foot over the snow-capped Pyrenees into Spain. It was a physically demanding and perilous journey, a world away from the luxury she had once known. But she endured. From Spain, she made her way to Gibraltar, and finally back to London. She had escaped the Gestapo's grasp. But her war was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The woman who had been a courier, an organizer, a phantom known as the White Mouse, was about to be trained, armed, and sent back into the heart of occupied France, not as a mouse but as a warrior. Upon her arrival in London in the spring of 1943, Nancy Wake was not met with a quiet debriefing and a well-earned rest. The city itself was a testament to the war's reality. Scarred by the Blitz, its nights punctuated by air raid sirens, its days a study in grim determination. For Nancy, the relief of escape was fleeting, quickly replaced by a consuming, restless purpose. She had not fled France to seek safety. She had retreated in order to return. Her personal war against the Nazis was not over, and she sought out the one organization that could send her back into the fight, not as a courier, but as a soldier. This organization was the Special Operations Executive, or SOE. It was one of the war's great secrets. A clandestine body conceived by Winston Churchill himself, with the simple, audacious mandate to set Europe ablaze. The SOE was a ghost organization, operating from unassuming Baker Street offices and secluded country estates. It existed outside the conventional structures of the military, a world of shadows and deniable operations. To enter its world was to step through a looking glass, to undergo a form of archaeology, excavating the hidden machinery of a secret war being waged in the towns and forests of occupied Europe. Nancy's induction was not a typical military enlistment. It began in a quiet, nondescript room in a London hotel. The men who interviewed her were not soldiers in uniform, but academics, businessmen, and civil servants. They were quiet, observant men who looked for qualities that could not be measured on a parade ground. They asked probing, sometimes unsettling questions, trying to find the bedrock of her character. They were not looking for bravado or blind patriotism. They were looking for psychological resilience, for linguistic skill, for unwavering self-reliance, and for a particular kind of cold, calculated resolve. In Nancy, with her fluent French, her first-hand experience in the field, and her burning personal hatred of the enemy, they found precisely what they were looking for. Once accepted, she was sent to a place that did not officially exist on any map. She was taken to one of the SOE's secret training schools, STS Group B, large country estates requisitioned for the war, hidden away in the rolling hills of the English or Scottish countryside. Imagine a grand old house, surrounded by ancient trees and manicured lawns, a place that should have smelled of beeswax and old leather, a place that should have echoed with the laughter of garden parties. Now, it echoed with the crack of rifle fire and the dull thud of men learning to fight in silence. The beauty of the surroundings was a strange, almost surreal backdrop for the grim curriculum being taught within its walls. The training was a systematic dismantling of her civilian self and the forging of a new one. It was a quiet, methodical education in the arts of deception, sabotage, and survival. The days were long and intensely demanding, pushing trainees to their physical and mental limits. The physical regimen was brutal. It involved long runs in the cold English rain, crawling through muddy obstacle courses under barbed wire, and learning to scale walls and climb ropes until muscles screamed in protest. This was not about building parade ground fitness. It was about creating a body that could endure forced marches, that could function on little food and less sleep, a body that would not fail its owner in a moment of crisis. Parallel to this was the instruction in tradecraft, the core skills of an operative. This was the true mystery of the SOE. It was taught in quiet classrooms, where the lessons were on the delicate art of living a lie. Trainees spent hours creating and memorizing their legend or cover story. This was far more than just a false name and occupation. It was a complete life, with a fabricated childhood, imagined friends, plausible memories, and answers to any conceivable question. They were drilled relentlessly, woken in the middle of the night, and interrogated, forced to produce the details of their fictional life under extreme stress, until the lie became more natural than the truth. They learned the painstaking craft of codes and ciphers. Imagine sitting for hours, the only sound the scratching of a pencil, learning to use a one-time pad, a block of unique random keys used to encrypt a message. The process was slow, meticulous, demanding absolute precision. A single mistake could render a vital message unintelligible. They learned to compose messages that were both concise and unambiguous, to hide them on impossibly small pieces of silk or paper, and to find ingenious hiding places for them on their person or in their luggage. Then there was the weapons training. This was not the marksmanship of a soldier on a firing range. This was about intimate, close-quarters combat. They learned to handle the Sten gun, a simple, mass-produced submachine gun, known for its tendency to jam, but valued for its small size, easily concealed beneath a coat. They learned the feel of it, the way to clear a stoppage in the dark by touch alone. They handled German weapons as well, the Luger pistol, the MP40 machine pistol, so that a captured weapon could be turned against its former owner. And they were taught the grim art of silent killing. The instruction was delivered in a calm, almost clinical tone by men who had perfected these techniques in the back alleys and trenches of other conflicts. They practiced on dummies in the training hall, learning the precise, efficient movements required to disable a sentry with a knife or with their bare hands. There was no glory in this training. It was a cold, hard necessity. It was about acknowledging the reality that to survive and succeed in occupied territory, one might have to take a life silently, without hesitation. For Nancy and for the other women of the SOE, this was perhaps the most profound and disturbing part of their education. The acquisition of a skill that stood in stark opposition to every instinct of civilized life. They also learned the craft of sabotage. They sat at long wooden tables and were introduced to the tools of the trade. They handled slabs of plastic explosive, kneading it like dough. They learned the delicate mechanics of time pencils, a metal tube containing a vial of acid that, when crushed, would eat through a wire to trigger a detonator. They were taught how to calculate the precise amount of explosive needed to sever a railway line, not just blow a hole in it, how to place a charge on a bridge pylon to ensure its complete collapse. It was a form of destructive engineering, a science of calculated chaos. The culmination of the training was the parachute course. After practicing jumps from a stationary tower, they were taken up in the noisy, vibrating belly of an aircraft. Imagine the feeling, the roar of the engines, the cold wind whipping through the open fuselage, the red light, then the green, the lurch as the static line pulled the parachute open, and then a sudden, profound silence. For a few minutes, the agent was suspended between the sky and the earth, a tiny, solitary figure, drifting down towards a dark, unknown landscape. It was the ultimate test of nerve, a final surrender to forces beyond one's control, and a perfect metaphor for the agent's life to come, a lonely descent into danger. In the spring of 1944, Nancy Wake was deemed ready. Her mission was to parachute into the Auvergne region of central France, a rugged, mountainous area known to be a hotbed of resistance activity. Her role was to be the official liaison between the Maquis, the French resistance fighters, and the SOE leadership in London. She was to be an organizer, a logistician, and a leader. She would coordinate the parachute drops of weapons and supplies, manage the considerable finances for the region's operations, and help turn a scattered group of guerrilla fighters into a disciplined, effective fighting force ahead of the anticipated D-Day landings. For the flight, she was no longer Nancy Wake, SOE agent. She was dressed in French-made clothes, her pockets filled with French francs, her papers identifying her as Madame André. Every detail was considered. Tucked away, a grim last resort, was the L-pill, the cyanide capsule that agents were given, a choice to end their own life rather than face capture and interrogation. On the night of April 29, 1944, she jumped. The darkness below was absolute. The silence of the descent was broken by the landing, a rough tumble into a field. In the dark, she struggled with the cumbersome silk of the parachute, a moment of absurd comedy in the midst of immense peril. Her parachute had snagged in a tree. After extricating herself, she found the local reception committee, maquisards, who'd been waiting for the drop. One of them, a local leader named Captain Henri Tardivar, saw her tangled parachute and remarked, "I hope that all the trees in France bear such beautiful fruit this year." Nancy's reported reply, coarse and direct, was typical of her style, telling him not to give her that French shit. The ice was broken. The white mouse had returned. She had now entered the unique culture of the maquis. These were not the professional agents she had trained with in England. The maquisards were a motley collection of men and a few women from all walks of life. They were farmers, students, factory workers, socialists, conservatives and foreign refugees, united only by their refusal to accept the German occupation. They lived a hard, precarious existence in camps hidden deep in the forests and mountains. Imagine their camps. They were collections of crude huts, built from logs and branches, constantly damp and cold. The air was thick with the smell of green wood smoke, of stew cooking in a communal pot, of unwashed bodies. Their arsenal was a hodgepodge of old hunting rifles, a few pistols, perhaps a captured German machine gun, and the precious, desperately awaited supplies dropped from the night sky by the RAF. Life was a constant struggle for food, for warmth, for survival, all under the ever-present threat of German patrols and betrayal. Into this world stepped Nancy Wake. She was not just a liaison. She was the paymaster, the quartermaster, and a formidable commander in her own right. She controlled the wireless radio, the vital link to London. She distributed the millions of francs sent to fund the resistance. She organized the drop zones, oversaw the distribution of the newly arrived weapons, and taught the men how to use them. She was a woman in a world of men, a foreigner giving orders to proud Frenchmen on their own soil. She earned their respect not with charm, but with competence, with her tireless work ethic, and with a courage that matched or exceeded their own. The culture she helped to create was one of disciplined, effective resistance, bridging the gap between the amateur partisans and the professional machinery of the SOE. The quiet life of the agent in the lonely apartment was a distant memory. Here, in the wild heart of France, surrounded by an army of her own making, her true war had just begun. While Nancy's world was now one of damp forests and cold steel, of shared hardship and immediate, visceral danger, her actions did not exist in a vacuum. Her life, and the lives of the 7,000 maquisards she would come to lead, were a single vital nerve in a vast, complex organism of war. Her reality on the ground was only one of several realities, all interconnected, yet all profoundly different. To truly understand her role, we must allow our perspective to gently pull back, to drift away from the forests of the Auvergne and visit two other worlds, two other daily lives that were inextricably linked to hers, the world of the hunter and the world of the planner. First, let us imagine a German officer. He is not a caricature of evil, but a man of ambition and professional duty, perhaps a Sturmbannführer in the SS, or a senior official in the Gestapo. His office is in a nearby city, Clermont-Ferrand, for instance. He does not occupy a concrete bunker, but a requisitioned chateau or a stately administrative building, a place that still bears the elegant hallmarks of the French Republic. His office is spacious with high ceilings, perhaps an ornate, unlit fireplace, and tall windows that look out onto a manicured garden, now slightly neglected. The air here does not smell of wood smoke and damp earth, but of floor polish, stale cigar smoke, and the sharp, clean scent of paper. This is a world of order, of routine, of bureaucracy. Our officer's day begins at a predictable hour. He is driven to his office in a black staff car that glides through streets where civilians avert their eyes and fall silent. He wears a perfectly tailored uniform, the silver insignia on his collar polished, his boots gleaming. The authority he represents is absolute, and his appearance must reflect it. His mornings are not spent on patrol, but at his large mahogany desk. Before him are not weapons but files, stacks of them. His war is fought with reports, with memoranda, with lists and charts. He reviews the overnight summaries from his subordinates. A report on industrial production at a local factory, a list of newly arrested individuals suspected of black market activity, and, most vexing of all, the file on terrorist activity in the mountainous regions. This file has grown thicker in recent weeks. It speaks of sabotaged railway lines, of ambushed patrols, of whispers of a growing bandit army in the hills, and it speaks of a new unsettling level of coordination. The attacks are more audacious, more precise. On a large map of the Auvergne region pinned to a corkboard on the wall, there are dozens of coloured pins, each marking an incident or a suspected Maquis camp. The pattern is frustratingly random, a scattered rash that he cannot seem to treat. He receives intercepts from the radio direction finding teams, but the signals are brief, professionally coded, and often transmitted just before an Allied supply drop, disappearing before a precise location can be fixed. His primary frustration is the ghost he is hunting. The reports from informants are vague, contradictory. They speak of a leader, an organizer, someone with money and weapons from London. Some say it is a man, a British officer. But other, more persistent rumours speak of a woman with an iron will and a sharp tongue, who commands the respect of the Maquisards. This rumour is galling, an insult to his sense of order. The idea that a woman could be orchestrating this chaos is an affront to his world view, to the structured masculine hierarchy of his own organisation. He thinks of her not as a soldier, but as a criminal, a destabilising influence that must be eradicated for the good of the new order he is trying to impose. His work is a cycle of meetings. He confers with the head of the local milice, the French collaborators whose local knowledge is useful, but whose reliability he questions. He has conference calls with his superiors in Paris, or even Berlin, where he must project an image of calm control, assuring them that the situation is being managed, while knowing the truth is far messier. He dictates letters, authorises search operations, large, cumbersome sweeps through the forests that cost significant manpower and fuel, and almost always come up empty. The Maquis, warned by the local populace, simply melt away into the rugged terrain they know so well. His evenings are a strange mix of the mundane and the privileged. He might dine at the officers' mess, located in the town's best hotel. The food here is plentiful, requisitioned from the very farms the Maquis are hiding amongst. He eats well, with proper cutlery on fine china, while Nancy and her men are eating a thin stew from a tin bowl. He might drink a fine French wine, confiscated from a local cellar. The conversation is of promotions, of politics back home, of complaints about the sullen, ungrateful nature of the French. The war for him is a career. Victory is assumed, and his role is one of management, of pacification. This resistance is a temporary annoyance, a problem to be solved with sufficient force and methodical paperwork. He goes to sleep in a comfortable bed with clean sheets, the distant threat of the Maquis an abstract problem to be dealt with in the morning, unaware that the woman who is the source of his frustration is perhaps only 50 kilometers away, sleeping on a bed of pine needles, her mind also focused on the day to come. Now let us allow our minds to travel further, across the English Channel, back to London. Imagine a different kind of office, perhaps on Baker Street, the headquarters of the SOE. The atmosphere here is not one of military polish, but of focused, academic intensity. The rooms are filled with cigarette smoke, the click-clack of typewriters, and quiet, serious conversation. The people here wear civilian clothes, tweed jackets and flannel trousers. They are professors, lawyers, and linguists. Their war is an intellectual one, a grand complex puzzle. Here, Nancy Wake is not a person but an asset. She is a code name, Hélène, a file in a cabinet, a pin on a map, a different map from the one in the German officer's office. This one covers all of France, and she is just one of dozens of pins representing agents in the field. Her daily life is a series of short, cryptic messages that arrive via the wireless, transcribed from Morse code onto a flimsy piece of paper. Successful drop zone tango, supplies received. Request more explosives. The planner's day is one of analysis and strategy. They read the decryptions from Bletchley Park, the product of the immense intellectual effort to break the German Enigma codes. They study aerial reconnaissance photos, looking for the telltale signs of German troop movements or new fortifications. Their job is to see the biggest picture, to orchestrate the symphony of sabotage that will disrupt the German war machine in the weeks leading up to the Normandy invasion. Their decisions have life or death consequences, but they are made in the calm of a London office. A debate over whether to send more anti-tank weapons versus medical supplies to Nancy's circuit is a logistical calculation. They weigh the strategic value of destroying a particular bridge against the risk to the agent and the local Maquis group. They feel the pressure of responsibility, a heavy intellectual weight. But it is a world away from the immediate physical fear of a German patrol. Their hands touch paper, not the cold steel of a Sten gun. Their anxiety is for the success of the mission, for the agent they know only as a name and a set of skills. But it is an anxiety buffered by distance and by the structures of command. Let's imagine a single operation to see these three realities intersect. Nancy and her team are tasked with destroying a key railway viaduct. For her, the experience is all-consuming and sensory. It is the tense, silent march through the woods at night, the air cold and smelling of pine. It is the feel of the heavy canvas sack of explosives cutting into her shoulder. It is the whispered commands, the careful placement of the charges against the stone pier of the viaduct, her fingers growing numb in the cold. It is the heart-pounding tension of lighting the fuse and scrambling away into the darkness. And then, the deep, satisfying crump of the explosion, the rumble of falling masonry, followed by the exhausting trek back to camp, a victory measured in sweat and adrenaline. The next morning for the German officer, the event is a piece of paper on his desk, a telex message informing him that Viaduct 7A on the main line is out of commission. It is a logistical nightmare. It means train schedules must be rerouted. It means repair crews must be dispatched under armed guard. It means another angry call from his superiors, and another black mark in his file. It is a failure of his control, a victory for the bandits. He launches another sweep, knowing it will likely fail, adding to his frustration and his determination to capture the phantom leader responsible. And in London, days later, a short message is decoded. Viaduct 7A destroyed. A planner takes a red pin and removes it from the map. He makes a note in a ledger. The report is passed up the chain of command, where it becomes a single line in a summary for a general, and eventually, for Churchill himself. It is a data point, a confirmation that the strategy is working. It is a quiet, bloodless victory, celebrated with a nod of approval and another cup of tea. 3 distinct worlds, 3 separate realities, all revolving around a single woman and a single act of defiance. The gritty, hands-on struggle for survival and success in the field. The orderly, bureaucratic effort to impose control and punish dissent. And the detached, strategic overview from a safe distance. Nancy existed at the brutal intersection of these worlds. A solitary figure whose intimate daily struggle was, for others, simply a report on a desk or a pin on a map. Her life was a constant negotiation between the grand, abstract plans of her commanders and the cold, hard ground of occupied France. We return now to the forests of the Auvergne, to the cool, damp air and the scent of pine. We return to Nancy Wake, but the woman we find now is different from the cautious agent living in a quiet town, different even from the determined fugitive crossing the Pyrenees. Here, she is a commander, a leader of thousands of men. The role settled upon her not through rank or commission in a traditional army, but through the raw, unadorned metrics of competence and courage. The daily life of a Maquis leader was not a series of dramatic battles. It was first and foremost a grueling exercise in logistics and human management. Imagine Nancy in the main camp, a settlement of crude huts hidden in a deep valley. Her office might be a small, slightly more weatherproof hut, with a rough-hewn table and a single chair. Here, she presided over the complicated, often messy, business of running a guerrilla army. Her most powerful tool, in the beginning, was not a gun, but the lists she kept and the money she distributed. She was the paymaster. The funds parachuted in from London were her responsibility. Picture her at her table, the dim light of a paraffin lamp casting long shadows, carefully counting out stacks of French francs. This money was the lifeblood of the resistance. It was used to buy food on the black market from sympathetic farmers. It was used to pay for information, to bribe low-level officials, to purchase medical supplies for the wounded. Each transaction was a risk, a delicate negotiation in a world of whispers and shifting loyalties. Her authority came from her control of these resources, and she wielded it with scrupulous fairness and a firm hand. She also oversaw the arsenal. When a canister, dropped from a night sky, was opened, it was like a grim Christmas morning. The long, dark shapes of Sten guns, the heavy weight of ammunition boxes, the waxy blocks of plastic explosive. It was her job to record every item and to decide how these precious resources would be allocated among the different groups of fighters under her command. This often involved settling disputes. One group leader might feel he needed another machine gun. Another might argue his men deserved the newest supply of grenades. Nancy had to be the arbiter, her decisions based not on favoritism, but on a cold assessment of strategic need. She had to be a politician and a diplomat as much as a soldier. Her leadership style was direct, unsentimental, and utterly pragmatic. She worked tirelessly, often sleeping only a few hours a night. She shared the same meager food as her men, thin stews, hard bread, whatever could be foraged or bought. She tolerated no foolishness and was known for a vocabulary that could make a hardened soldier blush. Yet, this toughness was the foundation of the trust her men placed in her. They knew she would never ask them to take a risk she would not take herself. They saw her not as an aloof commander, but as one of them, sharing the same cold, the same hunger, and the same danger. The rhythm of life in the Maquis was one of waiting, followed by intense, concentrated bursts of action. Let us imagine the planning of a typical sabotage mission. The target is a power station that supplies a factory producing materials for the German army. The planning begins in Nancy's hut, with a hand-drawn map spread on the table. She and her lieutenants would study it for hours, discussing the layout of the facility, the number of guards, the patrol schedules gleaned from local informants. Every detail was considered: the route of approach, the point of entry, the precise placement for the explosive charges to cause maximum damage with minimum risk. Then came the execution. A small team, perhaps a dozen men, led by Nancy herself, would set out under the cover of darkness. Imagine the sensation of that journey, a silent trek through miles of dense forest. The only sound the soft tread of feet on damp earth and the whisper of wind in the trees. The air is cool, carrying the scent of moss and rotting leaves. There is a tension, a heightened awareness that makes every snapped twig sound like a gunshot. They move not as a formal military unit, but as shadows, using the landscape itself as their primary weapon. At the target, the waiting would begin. Hours spent lying motionless in the cold dark, observing the final patrol, waiting for the perfect moment of inattention. Then the swift, silent infiltration. The placement of the charges, the work done by touch and muscle memory, the uncoiling of the fuse wire, the final heart-stopping moment of setting the timer. Then the retreat, just as silent, just as swift, melting back into the forest. And from a safe distance they would stop and wait, listening. The explosion, when it came, was not a loud, dramatic crack, but a deep, resonant whump that travelled through the ground, a physical confirmation of success. There was no cheering, only a quiet, grim satisfaction before the long, weary march back to camp. Sometimes the missions were not about sabotage, but about direct confrontation. Imagine an ambush on a German convoy. A stretch of road, winding through a narrow wooded valley, would be chosen. The maquisards would take up positions on the high ground, concealed among the rocks and trees. Then the long, agonizing wait, hours would pass. The men would lie still, muscles cramping, their focus entirely on the empty road below. Nancy would be there, moving from position to position, her presence a source of calm reassurance. The arrival of the convoy was first a distant sound, a low rumble that grew steadily into the distinct growl of truck engines. Then the vehicles would appear, green and grey machines of war, moving with an arrogant confidence. At Nancy's signal, the quiet valley would erupt into a cacophony of controlled violence. A felled tree might block the road, and as the convoy halted in confusion, the air would fill with gunfire. The engagement was brutal, chaotic, and short. The goal was to neutralize the enemy, to seize their weapons, their supplies, their intelligence, and to disappear before reinforcements could arrive. The aftermath was a grim task, collecting the spoils of war from the wreckage, a stark and unavoidable consequence of their fight for freedom. Nancy's reputation for audacity and personal courage was cemented in many such actions, but perhaps the most legendary testament to her resolve was not a battle, but a bicycle ride. In one devastating German raid, her circuit's wireless operator was forced to flee, destroying his codes and his radio to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. This left Nancy's 7,000 men completely cut off from London. They were deaf and mute, unable to receive orders or coordinate the desperately needed supply drops. Nancy made a decision. She would go and get new codes. The nearest friendly operator she knew of was hundreds of kilometers away. She commandeered a bicycle and began an epic journey of more than 500 kilometers, 250 there and 250 back, across mountainous, occupied territory. Imagine the sheer physical and mental fortitude this required. For 3 days, she cycled relentlessly. She rode through German checkpoints, relying on her flawless French, her forged papers, and her sheer, unshakable nerve to get through. She pedaled over steep mountain passes, her body aching with exhaustion, sleeping in barns and ditches, eating almost nothing. It was a journey of pure will, a solitary battle against distance, fatigue, and constant fear. She made it, retrieved the codes, and rode all the way back. When she finally stumbled back into her camp, she was too exhausted to speak. Her men had to lift her from the bicycle. She had pushed her body to its absolute limit, but she had saved her army. In these months of command, Nancy was forced to confront the darkest aspects of war. On one occasion, during a raid, she personally dealt with an SS sentry. It was a moment of cold, hard reality. All her training, all her resolve, converged into a single, silent, and brutal necessity. It was not an act of vengeance, but a calculated, grim duty required for the survival of herself and her men. It was an act that left its own invisible scar, a stark and permanent reminder of the price of resistance. The White Mouse had learned to be a killer, not out of hatred, but out of a fierce protective love for the people and the cause she served. Victory in a secret war is never clean. It is not marked by parades or the raising of flags. It is measured in successful missions, yes, but it is also paid for with a currency of loss, of fear, and of profound, often silent, human suffering. The successes of Nancy's Maquis, the destroyed bridges, the captured convoys, the growing sense of an ungovernable territory, could not go unanswered forever. The German officer in his stately office in Clermont-Ferrand, the one who saw her actions as a frustrating rash, finally received the authority he needed to apply a more drastic cure. In June of 1944, just as the news of the D-Day landings in Normandy began to spread, bringing a surge of hope to the resistance, the Germans launched a massive counter-offensive against the Maquis of the Auvergne. An estimated 22,000 German soldiers, a force far outnumbering Nancy's own, were deployed to the region. Their mission was simple and brutal: to encircle the area, to sweep the forests, and to crush the terrorist threat once and for all. For Nancy and her fighters, the world shrank. The vast protective forest suddenly felt like a cage. The war changed from a series of daring, proactive strikes to a desperate, defensive struggle for survival. The daily rhythm of life in the camps was shattered. No longer were there quiet days of waiting and planning. Now every day was a scramble. The camps had to be abandoned, the men constantly on the move, breaking into smaller, more mobile groups to avoid the German sweeps. Imagine the atmosphere during this time, the constant gnawing tension. Every distant engine sound, every unfamiliar bird call could be a sign of an approaching patrol. Sleep was fleeting, snatched in short, nervous bursts. Food became even more scarce. The sympathetic farmers who had supplied them were now under intense scrutiny. Their farms watched, their movements restricted. The maquisards were forced to live off the land, their diet reduced to whatever they could hunt or forage. Hunger became a constant companion, a dull ache that sapped their strength and frayed their nerves. The fighting was no longer on their terms. It was sporadic, chaotic, and vicious. A sudden, violent clash with a German patrol in a forest clearing. A desperate firefight to break through an encircling line. These were not battles for strategic objectives. They were battles to escape, to live another day. The cost was high. Men who had shared stories around a campfire one night were gone the next. The losses were not abstract numbers. They were empty spaces in the formation, familiar faces suddenly missing, their absence a heavy, unspoken weight on the survivors. Nancy, as the commander, felt each loss personally. These were her men. She had armed them, trained them, led them, and now she watched as their numbers dwindled. The greatest burden, perhaps, was the price paid by the civilian population. The Germans practiced a policy of collective punishment. Any town or village suspected of aiding the Maquis was made an example of. The consequences were horrific. Imagine a small village, a cluster of stone houses that had stood for centuries. After a German reprisal, a dreadful silence would fall over it. The streets would be empty, the houses hollowed out by fire, their roofs gone, leaving only blackened shells open to the sky. The life of the village, its history, its community, was simply extinguished. For Nancy, this was an almost unbearable weight of responsibility. Her presence, her fight for freedom, had inadvertently brought this devastation upon the very people she was trying to liberate. It was a terrible paradox of guerrilla warfare, a wound that festered in the conscience of any thoughtful leader. It was during this period of intense pressure, of constant movement and loss, that the most personal blow fell. The news came as all news did in that world, not through an official channel, but as a whispered message, a piece of intelligence passed along the chain. It was a message from London, containing information gleaned from other resistance networks. The message was about her husband, Henri Fiocca. Let us try to picture the moment. Nancy is in a temporary command post, perhaps a dilapidated barn on an isolated farm. She is exhausted, her face etched with the strain of the past weeks. An agent approaches her, his expression grim. He speaks in a low voice. He tells her that months ago, not long after she had made her escape from Marseille, the Gestapo had arrested Henri. They had believed his protestations of innocence at first, but under the growing pressure from the White Mouse's continued elusiveness, they had taken him anyway. He was a lever they hoped to use against her. He was taken to their headquarters, where he was questioned. The word questioned was a cold euphemism for what truly happened in those cellars. Henri Fiocca, a man of peace, a wealthy industrialist who loved his wife and his country, had refused to talk. He had refused to betray her or anyone in her network. And for his loyalty, for his courage, he had been subjected to the worst forms of torture. Finally, with no information gained, he had been executed. For Nancy, this news was a quiet cataclysm. There was no outward collapse, no scream of anguish. The discipline of the agent, the stoicism of the commander, was too deeply ingrained. To the men around her, she might have just appeared to grow very still, her gaze fixed on some distant point, her face an unreadable mask. But inwardly, a part of her world simply shattered. The hope that had sustained her through the darkest moments. The hope of a reunion with Henri in a liberated France, of returning to the life they had built in their sun-drenched villa in Marseille, was extinguished in an instant. Imagine the contrast that must have flooded her mind. The memory of his smile, the sound of his laughter, the feeling of safety and happiness in his arms, and then the cold, horrifying image of his final moments. A reality she could only imagine, but which would now haunt her forever. Her personal war, her hatred of the Nazis, had always been fueled by a righteous anger at the injustices she witnessed. Now it was fused with a profound and bottomless grief. The enemy had not just taken her country, they had taken her love, her future, her past. She could not afford to mourn. She was a commander with thousands of men relying on her. She had to suppress the pain, pack it away into a cold, hard place deep inside her, and continue to function. She had to continue giving orders, planning movements, and projecting an aura of unshakable strength. But something had fundamentally changed. The fight was no longer just for an ideal, for the liberation of a nation. It was now a deeply personal vendetta. The woman who had been forged in the streets of Vienna, trained in the fields of England, and hardened in the forests of France, was now hollowed out by a loss so profound it could never be repaired. Yet, it was this very hollowness that she would fill with an even colder, more relentless resolve to see the war through to its bitter end. The price of her resistance had been the anchor of her own soul. The summer of 1944 was long and hot for Nancy and the Marquis, trapped in their defensive struggle. It felt as though the oppressive heat and the German pressure would last forever. But beyond the forests of the Auvergne, the great machinery of the war was turning. The Allied landings in Normandy on June 6th had been the first crack in the fortress. Then, in mid-August, a second invasion, Operation Dragoon, brought Allied forces ashore on the Mediterranean coast of France, not far from where Nancy's old life with Henri had once been. The German army in France was now caught in a vast pincer movement. The hunters became the hunted. For the Marquis, the change was not instantaneous, but it was palpable. It was a subtle shift in the air, a new sense of possibility. German patrols became less frequent, their movements more defensive, more concerned with retreating eastward than with combing the forests for resistance fighters. The invisible cage that had enclosed the Auvergne began to dissolve. And so, the Marquis began to emerge from the shadows. The liberation of the region was not a single grand event, but a slow, creeping tide. A town-by-town reclamation of a lost nation. Imagine a small village that had lived under German occupation for 4 long years. One morning, the German garrison, a handful of tired, anxious soldiers, would simply pack their vehicles and leave, heading east. A few hours of tense, uncertain silence would follow. And then a single window would open, and a French tricolour flag, hidden away for years in the bottom of a chest, would be hung out. Then another would appear, and another. Soon, The grey stone of the village would be alive with red, white, and blue. The church bells, silent for so long, would begin to ring, not with the frantic urgency of a warning, but with a joyous, unrestrained peal. Nancy and her fighters, once seen as bandits and terrorists, were now greeted as heroes. They would march into these towns, not as a conquering army, but as sons and brothers returning home. They were a strange sight, a ragged collection of men in civilian clothes, armed with a motley assortment of British, German, and French weapons, their faces thin from hunger, but their eyes bright with victory. Nancy would often be at their head, a solitary female figure whose legend had preceded her. She was Madame André, the leader of the Maquis, the ghost who had tormented the Germans, now made real. Her greatest single triumph, the culmination of all her work, came in late August. The German garrison in the city of Vichy, the former capital of collaborationist France, was preparing to surrender. This was not a small outpost. It was a force of some 20,000 men. The German commander, proud and adhering to military protocol, refused to surrender his army to a group of irregulars. He would only surrender to an officer of a regular army. It was a matter of professional honor. Yet, the Maquis, Nancy's Maquis, effectively controlled the entire region surrounding the city. A delicate and tense negotiation began. Nancy was a central figure, not as a diplomat, but as the power broker who held the real military strength on the ground. A compromise was eventually reached. An American officer was brought in to officially accept the surrender, satisfying the German commander's sense of protocol. But the surrender was conducted in the presence of the Maquis leaders, an undeniable acknowledgement of who had truly won the fight for the Auvergne. Imagine the scene. The German officers, immaculate in their uniforms, standing stiffly as they handed over their command. And watching them, the exhausted, triumphant Maquisards, their battle finally over. For Nancy, it was the ultimate vindication. The bureaucratic machine that had hunted her and murdered her husband was now being dismantled before her very eyes. But the end of fighting does not always bring peace. In the vacuum of power left by the retreating Germans, a new, more intimate conflict came to the surface. It was a time of grim accounting. Years of resentment, of suspicion, of betrayals both real and imagined, boiled over. In towns and villages across France, a raw and painful settling of scores took place. An unofficial purge known as the épuration sauvage. Those who had collaborated with the Germans, or were merely suspected of it, faced a swift and public form of justice. For the men, this could mean execution with little or no trial. For the women accused of horizontal collaboration, of having relationships with German soldiers, the punishment was one of intense, ritualized humiliation. Their heads were shaved in public squares, a mark of shame that separated them from the community. Picture these scenes not with excitement, but with a sense of deep human tragedy. The crowd shouting, the women weeping, a raw, ugly release of pent-up fear and anger. Nancy, as a leader, had to navigate this volatile atmosphere, trying to impose a measure of order and prevent mob rule, an often impossible task. The clear moral lines of fighting an external enemy became blurred in the messy, complicated reality of a nation at war with itself. For Nancy, the victory was hollowed out by her personal grief. The purpose that had driven her with such ferocious intensity was now fulfilled. The enemy was defeated. France was free. But what was left for her? The structure of the war, the constant danger, the immense responsibility, all of it had served as a shield, a way to keep the pain of Henri's loss at bay. Now, in the quiet moments after the victory, the silence was filled with his absence. The cheering crowds, the grateful handshakes, the praise from her commanders. None of it could penetrate the cold, empty space he had left behind. Her job was not quite done. For a time, she acted as an informal civil administrator, her days filled with the mundane but necessary tasks of peace. She helped organize food distribution, oversaw the disarming of the Maquis fighters, and tried to mediate local disputes. The thrilling clandestine work of the saboteur was replaced by the thankless bureaucratic work of the peacemaker. Then, as the new French government under Charles de Gaulle began to establish its authority, and as the regular army moved in, her role became redundant. It was time to leave. Her departure from the Auvergne was quiet, without ceremony. She said goodbye to the men who remained, the ones who had survived, the ones with whom she had shared the most intense experience of her life. She was no longer Madame André, the leader of the Maquis. She was just Nancy Wake, a widow in a liberated country, facing a future she had never planned for. She left the mountains and the forests behind, a place of profound struggle and profound victory, a place that would forever be a part of her, and set her face towards the unknown landscape of a world at peace. And so our journey tonight comes to a close. We leave Nancy Wake on the road from the Auvergne, a solitary figure moving from a world of stark, violent clarity into the complex shades of peace. Her war was over. She would be decorated by France, by Britain, by America, becoming one of the most highly decorated servicewomen of the war. But these medals were just cold metal, symbols of a past she could never escape and could never fully reclaim. She would search for answers about Henry's fate, piecing together the grim details of his final months. She would eventually remarry and live a long life. But the ghost of her first love and the echoes of the war she fought so fiercely would remain with her always. Her story, like the history we explore in this quiet space, is a reminder of the intricate human threads that are woven into the grand tapestry of world events. It reminds us that behind the sweeping narratives of armies and nations, there are individuals. There are quiet apartments and hidden forest camps. There are moments of staggering courage and depths of unbearable loss. There is the slow, patient rhythm of a life lived under occupation, and the chaotic, desperate fight for liberation. Now as our story fades, allow your own mind to drift. Let go of the details of the names and the places. Feel the contrast between the hardness of that past and the softness of your present. The comfort of your bed, the safety of your room, the quiet, steady rhythm of your own breathing. There are no patrols in the street outside, no coded messages to decipher, no desperate choices to be made. There is only this moment of peace. The struggles of the past have been laid to rest, and now you too can find your rest. Allow the gentle darkness to envelop you and drift into a deep and peaceful sleep.